So, Apollo, the god of light, prophecy, music, poetry, the arts, and sciences, is by far the noblest conception within the whole range of Greek mythology, and his worship, which not only extended to all states of Greece, but also to Asia Minor and to every Greek colony throughout the world, stands out among them in the most ancient and strongly marked features of Grecian history, exerted a more decided influence over the Greek nation than that of any other deity, not excepting Zeus himself. Apollo was the son of Zeus and Leto, and was born beneath the shade of a palm tree which grew at the foot of Mount Cynthus, on the barren and rocky island of Delos. The poet tells us that the earth smiled when the young god first beheld the light of day, and that Delos became so proud and exultant at the honor of thus conferred upon her that she covered herself with golden flowers. Swans surrounded the island, and the Delian nymphs celebrated his birth with songs of joy. And I just want to stop and say that I've heard people ask in the past, what is the connection with swans and Apollo? And that was one of the connections right there. So the unhappy Leto, driven to Delos by the relentless persecutions of Hera, was not long permitted to enjoy her haven of refuge. Being still tormented by her enemy, the young mother was once more obliged to fly. She therefore resigned the charge of her newborn babe to the goddess Themis, who carefully wrapped the helpless infant in swaddling clothes, and fed him with nectar and ambrosia. But he had no sooner partaken of the heavenly food than, to the amazement of the goddess, he burst asunder the bands which confined his infant limbs, and springing to his feet, appeared before her as a full-grown youth, a divine strength and beauty. He now demanded a lyre and a bow, declaring henceforth he would announce to mankind the will of his father Zeus. The golden lyre, said he, shall be my friend, the bent bow my delight, and in oracles will I foretell the dark future. With these words he ascended to Olympus, where he was received with joyful acclamations into the assembly of the celestial gods, who acknowledged him as the most beautiful and glorious of all the sons of Zeus. Apollo is represented by the poets as being eternally young, his countenance glowing with joyful life, is the embodiment of immortal beauty. His eyes are of a deep blue. His forehead low, but broad and intellectual. His hair, which falls over his shoulders in long waving locks, is of golden or warm chestnut hue. He is crowned with laurel and wears a purple robe. In his hand he bears his silver bow, which is unbent when he smiles, but ready for use when he menaces evildoers. But Apollo, the eternal beautiful youth, the perfection of all that is graceful and refined, rarely seems to have been happy in his love. Either his advances met with repulse, or his union with the object of his affection was attended with fatal consequences. And then it actually has quite a bit on here about Apollo, which I am happy about. And the first section it's going to break into is going to talk about how he's considered the god of light. And that is, I'll save it to the end, but that is one thing that drew me to Apollo when I was reading about gods. So Apollo was the god of light in a twofold signification. First, as representing the great orb of day, which illuminates the world, and secondly, as the heavenly light which animates the soul of man. He inherited the function of sun god from Helios, with whom in later times he was so completely identified that the personality of the one became gradually merged in that with the other. We accordingly find Helios frequently confounded with Apollo. In myths belonging to the former attributes to the latter, and with some tribes, he is so complete with the identification that Apollo is called by them the Ionic people. The Ionic people. He is called Helios Apollo. As the divinity whose power is developed in the broad light of day, he brings joy and delight to nature, and health and prosperity to man. And by the influences of warm and gentle rays, he disperses the noxious vapors of the night, assists in the grains to ripen and flowers to bloom. But although, as the god of the sun, he is life-giving and life-preserving power, by whom his gentle influence dispels the cold of winter, He is at the same time the god who by means shoots fiercely darting rays and that could spread disease and send sudden death to men and animals. And it is to this phase of his character that we must look for the explanation of his being considered in conjunction with his twin sister Artemis, who was later considered to be part of him as the moon goddess, a divinity of death. I don't know. I'm not going to agree with everything that this book has to say, since this wasn't written by a Hellenic polytheist. I don't know if I would go that far on some of the things. So you can this is when you take things with a grain of salt. But we can continue reading. So the brother and sister share the function between them, he taking man and she woman as her aim. Yeah, that's true. As those, especially who died in the bloom of youth, or at the advanced age, were believed to have been killed by the gentle arrows. But Apollo did not always send an easy death. We see in the Iliad how, when angered by the Greeks, that the god of the silver bow strode down from Olympus, with his quiver full of death-bringing darts, and sent a raging pestilence into the camp. For 9 days he let fly his fatal arrows, first on animals and then on men, till the air became darkened with the smoke of the funeral pyres. And his character as the god of light, Apollo is the protecting deity of shepherds, because he is the one who warms the fields and meadows, gives rich pastures to the flocks, and thereby gladdening the hearts of herdsmen. As the temperate heat of the sun exercises so invigorantly an effect on man and animals, and promotes the growth of those medicinal herbs and vegetable productions necessary for the cure of diseases, Apollo was supposed to possess the power of restoring health and life. Hence he was regarded the god of healing. But this feature in character we shall find more particularly developed in his son Asclepios, the veritable god of the healing art. Pursuing our analysis of the various phases in the character of Apollo, we find that with the first beams of his gentle light, all nature awakens to renewed life, and the wood re-echo with the jubilant sound of the untaught rays, warbled by thousands of feathered choristers. Hence, by nature inference, he is the god of music, and according to the belief of the ancients, the inspiration of genius, were inseparably connected with the glorious light of heaven. He is also the god of poetry and acts as a special patron of the arts and sciences. Apollo is himself the heavenly music among the Olympian gods, whose banquets are gladdened by the wondrous strains which he produces from his favorite instrument, the 7-string lyre. And that is in one of the hymns, I think is the one of the Homeric hymns of Apollo. I want to say that talks about how he plays the music and the muses dance, and it is the music of Olympus. It's one of my favorite hymns to Apollo. In the cult of Apollo, music formed a distinguished feature. All sacred dances and even the sacrifices in his honor were performed to the sound of musical instruments, and it is in a great measure owing to the influence which the leader of the 9 muses, the legitimate divinities of poetry and song. In this character, he is called Musagetes, and is always represented robed in a long flowing garment, his lyre to the tones of which he appears to be singing is suspended by a band across his chest, and his head is encircled with a wreath of laurel, and his long hair streaming down over his shoulders gives him somewhat an effeminate, female appearance. Sometimes I can't speak too well. All right, so that was it as the god of light. So that's what they gave to him for examples of being the god of light. And the god of prophecy is next. So, and now we must view the glorious god of light under another, and as far as regarded as his influence over the Greek nation, a much more important aspect, the god of prophecy. For in historical times, all the other functions and attributes of Apollo sink into his comparative insignificance before the great power which he exercised as the god of prophecy. It is true that all Greek gods were endowed to a certain extent with the faculty of foretelling future events, but Apollo, as a sun god, was the concentration of all prophetic power, as it was supposed that nothing escaped his all-seeing eye, which perpetrated the most hidden recesses, and laid bare the secrets which lay concealed behind the dark veil of the future. So we've seen that when Apollo assumed his godlike form, he took his place among the immortals, but he had not long enjoyed the rapturous delights of Olympus before he felt within him an ardent desire to fulfill his great mission of interpreting to mankind the will of his mighty Father. He accordingly descended to earth and traveled through the many countries, seeking a fitting site upon which to establish an oracle. At length, he reached the south side of a rocky heights of Parnassus, beneath which lay the harbors of Crisa. Here, under the overhanging cliff, he found a secluded spot where, from the most ancient times, there had existed an oracle, in which Gaia herself had revealed the future of man, in which, in the Declonian times, she had, resigned to Themis. It was guarded by the huge serpent Python, the scourge of the surrounding neighborhood, and the terror alike of men and cattle. The young god, full of confidence in his unerring aim, attacked and slew the monster with his arrows, thus freeing land and people from the mighty enemy. So, I've also read in another book that some people interpret the story of him slaying Python as him taking over Delphi from Dionysus, because there was an oracle of Dionysus, and Apollo eventually took that place. And some people say the mythological story of him killing the python is representative of him taking over as the god of oracles from Dionysus or Dionysus. So the grateful inhabitants, anxious to do an honor to their deliverer, flocked around Apollo, who proceeded to mark out a plan for a temple, and with the assistance of a number of eager volunteers, a suitable edifice was soon erected. It now became necessary to choose ministers who would often offer up sacrifices, interpret his prophecies to the people, and take the charge of the temple. Looking around, he saw in a far distance a vessel bound from Crete to the Peloponnesus, and determined to avail himself of her crew for his services. Assuming the shape of an enormous dolphin, he agitated the waters to such a degree that ship was tossed violently to and fro, to the great alarm of the mariners. At the same time, he raised a mighty wind, which drove the ship into the harbor of Crisa, where she ran aground. The terrified sailors dared not set foot on shore, but Apollo, under the form of a vigorous youth, stepped down to the vessel, revealed himself in his true character, and informed them that it was he who had driven them into Crisa, in order that they might become his priests and serve him in his temple. Arrived at the sacred fane, he instructed them how to perform the services in his honor, and desired them to worship him under the name Apollo Delphinios, because he had first appeared to them under the form of as a dolphin. Thus was established the far-famed Oracle of Delphi, the only institution of the kind which was not exclusively national, for it was consulted by Lydians, Phrygians, Etruscans, Romans, etc., and in fact was held in the high repute all over the world. In obedience to its decrees, the laws of Lycurgus were introduced and the earliest Greek colonies founded. No cities were built without first consulting the Delphic oracle, for it was believed that Apollo took special delight in founding of cities, the first stone of which he laid in person. Nor was an enterprise ever undertaken without inquiring at the sacred fane as to its probable success. Interesting. All right, so it has a tiny section about God of Atonement and how they would worship Apollo. So his as a God of Atonement, it says that, but that which brought Apollo more closely home to the hearts of the people, raised the whole moral tone of the great nation, was the belief gradually developed with the intelligence of the people that he was the God who accepted repentance as atonement for sin, who pardoned the contrite sinner, and who acted as a special protector of those who, like Orestes, who had committed a crime which required long years of expiation. So it was the Delphic oracle of Apollo that told Heracles how to atone for his crime that sent him on to his labors. So I have heard that before as well. All right, so the last little section is about worshiping Apollo. So let's see what it says about that. So the chief seat of worship of Apollo was at Delphi, and here was the most magnificent of all his temples, the foundation of which reached far beyond all historical knowledge, and which contained immense riches, the offerings of kings and private persons, who had received favorable replies from the oracle. The Greeks believed Delphi to be the central point of the earth, because two eagles sent forth from Zeus, one from the east and one from the west, were said to have arrived there at the same moment. The Pythian Games, celebrated in honor of the victory of Apollo over the Python, took place at Delphi every 4 years. In the first celebrations of these games, gods and goddesses and heroes contended for prizes, which were at first gold and silver, but consisted in latter times of simple laurel wreaths. On account of it being the place of his birth, the whole island of Delos was consecrated to Apollo, where he was worshipped with great solemnity. The greatest care was taken to preserve the sanctity of the spot, for which reason no one was suffered to be buried there. Interesting. At the foot of Mount Cynthus was a splendid temple to Apollo, which possessed an oracle and was enriched with magnificent offerings from all parts of Greece. Even foreigners in foreign nations held the island sacred, for when the Persians passed it on their way to attack Greece, they not only sailed by, leaving it uninjured, but sent rich presents to the temple. Games called Delia, constituted by Theseus, were celebrated at Delos every 4 years. A festival termed the Gymnopedia was held at Sparta in honor of Apollo, in which boys sang the praises of the gods and of the 300 Lacedaemonians who fell at the battle of Thermopylae. Wolves and hawks were sacred to Apollo, and the birds sacred to him were the hawk, raven, and swan. And so thank you again for joining me for Mythic Mondays. I've told the story many times, but when I got into Hellenic polytheism, Apollo was the god that drew me the most when I was reading about certain gods, and it was his aspect of light and truth. There was something about that just drew me in, and I became a devout follower of Apollon, as you can see one of my statues here and then behind me. Even so much so that it is my picture for the channel, and always in the top 10 are my rituals to Apollo. So I owe a lot to him.